There we go. Okay, Paul.
All right, everyone, thanks for coming out today to the second Transportation Advisory Group for two plans actually. But in particular today, the Milton Active Transportation Plan. So for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Paul Moser. I'm an engineer with DelDOT's Active Transportation and Community Connection section. And one of the things that my section does is provide assistance for municipalities to do sort of long-range planning for active transportation, so walking, bicycling, micromobility, traffic calming, stuff like that, to improve mobility, safety, and quality of life in towns, and really set up plans to come up with projects to then feed the programs that we're funding at DelDOT to improve walking and biking around the state. So that's the main goal of this, is to work with you guys to identify local town priorities that can make a difference, and then over time find ways to then fund them and improve the transportation system for everyone. So DelDOT, you guys know who DelDOT is, I'm sure. Delaware Department of Transportation. We manage a lot of the roads in the state, and we give money out for the roads that we don't manage, and sometimes not perfectly, but nonetheless, we touch just about anything that involves transportation in the state. Our motto is every trip, every mode, every dollar, every one. And this sort of planning is an effort to try and really make good on that motto. And one of the things that we do with every presentation is go over year-to-date traffic fatalities in our state. We are consistently ranked in the top 10 worst for pedestrian fatalities in the country. We've been number 2 before, but if you guys have ever done statistics in Delaware, you know it's volatile. So, but we're almost always in the top 10. We have a serious traffic safety issue in this state. It's basically systemic, and this year is no exception, right? We've had 102 fatalities so far this year, which you could say is down 10 from previous years, but that number fluctuates. It's still 102 people who didn't plan on dying or being seriously injured or maimed, just going about their daily life, and that happened as a mix of human factors, social factors, and our transportation network. So what we're trying to do, especially plans like this, is think about what we can do in the infrastructure realm to not just focus on reducing fatalities and serious injuries, but even smaller crashes and things that can make people's lives better. If you guys are here, put your phone on silent, by the way. Thank you for the reminder. Okay, so Jenna, you want to do this?
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, this is our second TAG meeting, Transportation Advisory Group meeting. Since our first one, we had a workshop and public survey in June. So we're going to go over that feedback. We also use that feedback. Speak up. We use that feedback from the June workshop and survey to develop a recommended network and some related ideas. So we'll be going over that. We will be using some terminology, so we're going to explain some of our terms and then have a discussion about funding mechanisms and then next steps. And we welcome your feedback. So these are the members of the TAG. I'm not going to have you all introduce yourselves this time for the sake of time. So for the June public feedback, we had a survey, which was online and offered it on paper at the workshop. We had 27 surveys completed. Some of the questions asked about where people would like to be able to walk and bike, but currently cannot, or choose not to. And these were the top locations listed for each mode: walker, wheelchair versus bike. And then here is some of the other feedback we got from the conversations at the workshop, comment forms, and the more open-ended questions in the survey. Some of the more frequently mentioned topic suggestions that we got. So a lot of concern about traffic speeds and wanting traffic calming was our top issue. We are going to be posting this online, so I'm not going to go over all the survey results, but you guys can look at them on the project website. So I have the rest of the questions laid out in here, but I'm just going to go through them. If you have any specific questions, we can look at them, but otherwise For the sake of time, we'll skip over them. So, as I mentioned, since June, we've been developing recommendations. Those recommendations were based on the public survey results, site visit, geospatial analysis of various existing conditions data, such as level of traffic stress, which we talked about last time. Proposed developer improvements that are coming along with incoming development that relate to bikes and peds, and prior relevant planning efforts, and the bicycle level of traffic stress framework basically kind of drives how we form our recommendations to make sure we're creating low stress systems. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Leah to talk about some of the key terms.
Thanks, Jenna. Who has a poll going on who trips first? It's not gonna be me. All right, so key terms. So we went over this a little bit last time, but before we get into our network map, just wanted to review kind of what we're talking about. So last time we met, we talked about level of traffic stress, and basically that is a way we can assess how stressful it feels for any of us to bike on a given road. Now, obviously, all of our tolerances are different, right? I bike often to commute, and I'm gonna ride on a busier road because I'm comfortable with that. But what we want to ensure is that most people can use the bike facilities we're proposing. And that means we're going to err on the side of more protection so people feel safe. Now, on some streets, a neighborhood street, traffic speeds are low, volumes are low. So the far left of that screen, and it is perfectly acceptable to say a bike can ride with traffic. Now, we may hear from your neighbors, residents, well, yeah, I live on a neighborhood street, but speeding's really a problem, right? So it's a low stress street, except for the fact that I have cars ripping down my street going 45. And that's when we would come in and say, okay, maybe we need a little traffic calming to make sure that people are obeying the speed limit, right? Because we can't have police on every corner making sure people do the right thing. But generally, we see those neighborhood streets as we don't need to do much there. Maybe we need some wayfinding signs, or you can see painted on the street there, what we call a sharrow marking, to tell people how to get maybe to downtown or just to the places we want them to go. Now, as we get to bigger streets with more volume and cars traveling a little faster, we start to maybe need a designated bike lane. And that's obviously pretty cheap and easy to do if we have the space to do it. Now, in town, we have a lot of pretty tight streets, right? Our curb to curb, you need at least 10 feet, 11 feet for a vehicular lane. Once you accommodate those, you may not have enough space in your pavement box to accommodate an on-road bike lane. And when that is the case, we have to look for alternate routes or other options. Now, the highest engineering effort and the most protection you can do is separate bikes totally from traffic. So that's the far right. That's a shared use path. You have a number of those in town. We have some on the independent alignments on the rail. And you have some, not as much in town, that are side paths directly adjacent to a roadway outside. Again, space constraints in town largely are going to make that challenging, but in some places it may be appropriate. So what our goal is here is to kind of piece together these different bike facility types to create a holistic network. So that network, one route across town may be a combination of all three things, because you're going to go from a low stress neighborhood street to a busy road you have to cross that we may need to do something at to make it feel safer. And again, think about not you or your savvy cyclists like myself or Paul or Gemma for that matter, or Randy, you're pretty good, but I know when we rode with you, there were some streets that we felt comfortable on that you were like, ooh, I don't normally ride here, right? But we are thinking about youth, we're thinking about young people who are trying to get to and from school safely and designing for a standard for young people and people who are less comfortable riding with traffic to feel comfortable to use a bike. And ideally, over time, that'll mean less car trips and less congestion and easier to get around using alternate modes. So I mentioned a little bit that low stress street, right? There's a term we use called a bicycle boulevard. And that's basically how do we take those existing quiet neighborhood streets and make them a little bit more attractive or more of a logical route for people. We'll be talking about some places where that makes sense. And again, that may not mean much other than some pavement markings and some signage and some traffic calming. So we're talking about low intervention, quick build, easy to implement, inexpensive stuff that you can build on what you have already, because a lot of this town is already in pretty good shape. Yeah, and you've done a lot of work in this space already. Both the state has a traffic calming manual, and of course, the traffic calming advisory ad hoc committee put together a report. So there are tools in the toolbox we can use. There are tools that with Paul and his team support at DelDOT, we can explore that would be logical, appropriate options. Obviously, again, we have a lot of state roads here, so we are gonna be working with DelDOT traffic and also maintenance and operations. You know, we wanna make sure that what it is we're building is able to be maintained over time and able to be, you know, plowing is always, there's all these things. So I'm glad to see there's some folks tonight from, or this afternoon from the town to speak to some of that. Now, again, our goal here is not to make things inconvenient for cars, it's to make things safe for everyone, whether you're driving, walking, biking. Randy, you were sharing you had a near miss. I think we've all been in situations downtown, even coming here. One car flew right past us in the sidewalk, on the crosswalk, another one yielded nicely. But how can we work together to make sure people are more compliant, slow down, and respect everyone else in the street? And really, our reason we want to slow down traffic is safety. That bottom chart there, I think, is really important. Now, hopefully, we don't have too many people in town traveling at 58 miles per hour. But when we are talking about those high speeds, even above 40 miles an hour, there's a 50% chance you're gonna die if you get hit, if you're on a bike or walking, right? And that force of a car striking at those speeds is huge. But if you can get those speeds down to closer to 30 and ideally even below 30 in the 25, 23 range, that's a lot better. Now, and this is average, right? Now, people who are old, it's worse. People who are young, it's worse, right? This is kind of your average statistic for risk of death. But that, again, Paul spoke to the state's statistics. You know, this is a major effort statewide to make things safer for all of us as we're traveling on our roads. And one other thing we don't think about is, you know, it's a risk for those of us who are walking and biking, but who of us who drive, which is probably everyone in this room, wants to live with the burden of having seriously injured or killed someone on the roads, right? And there are ways, things we can design to reduce the risk of that. So, talking about some improvements at crossings. So that's going to be a big part of the challenge here in town, is you may be riding or walking nicely along a quiet neighborhood street and then you get to a busier road. So how can we make those crossings safer? And you've already done some of that in town with the artistic crosswalks and some other things, but there are some other tools we can use strategically. So your local expertise and where these things may be necessary is going to be really important here. Including high visibility crosswalks. You can see raised crosswalk, kind of a speed table there. More of a traffic signal light situation on the about a rectangular rapid flashing beacon on the bottom, which may be appropriate where there's not a traffic signal already or at a mid-block crossing location. And also a more of a physical change, curb extensions you see on the kind of center of the screen there, whereby at the corner, you're in a place where you shouldn't have on-street parking anyway, because you're so close to the intersection. So you can actually build out the curb there to reduce the crossing distance and slow cars down as they approach that crosswalk because the road tightens up a little bit. So these are some of the tools in our toolbox that we'll be talking about moving forward as a thing to do. So again, we don't want to do this in a vacuum. We don't want to do it like this isn't going to take something to maintain, both build and maintain over time. So this is just a map depicting maintenance responsibility. I know some of you know this map like the back of your hand. Red streets are state's responsibility, green are the towns. And we have one little piece there that's privately held. So again, as we talk about what's appropriate for what street, we're going to be dealing with local forces or coordinating with state operations and maintenance to ensure that what we're doing is going to work for everyone involved, with the understanding, you know, money is tight across the board right now, right? So we'll talk a little bit later about grant funding and sources of funding for some of these things. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, who is going to speak to our preliminary recommendation.
Cool. So what we're going to present on today is not necessarily project specific. We're going to be presenting very, very project specific details and concepts at the first public workshop in December. We're still kind of working on those. What we're going to talk about today is more of a broad framework that we've developed for this analysis and proposing recommendations. That's geared originally towards cycling. You'll see that we talk a lot about cycling here, but at the same time, there's also several pedestrian oriented recommendations, and they overlap almost completely. Most of the places we're recommending some sort of cycling intervention would also be beneficial or explicitly have some sort of other improvement for pedestrians. So we use this framework of level of traffic stress, right? Looking at low stress streets and seeing how do people get around? How could they get around? And what are the deficiencies in a complete connected network? So we came up with this sort of theoretical framework for saying this could be a connected network for cycling around the town of Milton. And all of these lines you see here, essentially, they're colored basically by they have a link that goes all the way up or all the way down, essentially to form out a grid, right? Because, you know, travel is pretty random. People from somewhere want to go somewhere else. It's impossible to actually plan where they're going to go or think about it with omniscient. So the idea is we want to develop over time redundant travel options for people to get around town. So each of these would represent a link in the grid that long-term would have some sort of lower stress bicycling facility or countermeasures for traffic calming and pedestrian safety. So you guys know the town of Milton has a really, really constrained set of roads, especially going north and south. So what this lets us do is we sort of honed in on where the roads where there's not a lot of traffic speed, and we use the term traffic volume. Traffic volume is mean the amount of cars, right? So we try to really see where people are already traveling, how are they traveling, and can we make it better with projects and a connected network? So we're going to sort of go into a little more detail on this and highlight a couple of these different things and talk about what they look like, get your imaginations going. And this isn't exclusively what we're going to be recommending. So we have a couple other project recommendations we're going to do that aren't a part of this grid that we're going to go into at the public workshop. But we're also looking for feedback from you guys if there's other specific things we want to hone in on. We got a lot of feedback from the first public workshop that we're going to incorporate into that. But before I move on, does this concept make sense to you guys? Do you have any questions about this or what we're trying to convey here?
Yes, I see what I think are broken lines, and there are areas that indicate that there are no existing roads, but generally private property.
Yes,
Speaking about the private.
for sure. So that was for future development scenarios, right? As you guys know, there's a ton of development over on the northwest of Milton. That's going to be, I think it's already has plans in plus review, right? So if there's an opportunity to coordinate with the town to get connections to that new part of town, you now have a low stress route to now access those link uses for people inside town.
So roads here actually on the east side of it.
Oh, the yellow one?
There's a yellow one. And
Yeah.
there's also an orange one that goes across.
Yeah, same thing. So if those ever get developed, it would just be, we didn't want to actually say this is something, but while the town, if that comes up, it might be something worth considering for
The yellow
connectivity.
one would be developed as a cemetery. So that would be a piece of the map. That we can claim because it is private.
Oh, yeah. No, and also, yeah, the one that goes across the cemetery. Yeah, for sure. So we've tried to make contact with a couple of those. I've tried to make contact with Seminary Chat about this before. These are high level recommendations. There are some private property impacts.
You successful with your contacts? Because if we were,
No, I got one number, got me a dead voicemail, and the other I left a voicemail on about 2 weeks ago. So it'd be great to get in touch with them. So yeah, there are a couple private property impacts on here, and that's why this is a high level theoretical framework. We're not actually developing project recommendations yet. So really the idea is this something we want to move forward with? And is this something that's helpful? We're looking for feedback from you guys. And also if one of these does not work out, that does not mean the complete failure of this concept. Really the idea is what do routes look like north and south, east and west?
okay, so what road goes a? Well, there are two purple lines, one that runs horizontally and one that runs vertically.
Yeah.
The vertical line, only thing I know of in that region right now is an easement for sewer line going out of town. That's on the back side of things, so I'm not sure that there's even a road.
Yeah, so again, so the way that I typically have done this is a framework for planning that I learned from a guy named Peter Firth. You kind of start at the imaginative high level and then think about what the connected grid looks like, and then you move it into the realm of reality and pragmatism. So right now, this is very much at the high level analysis. What does a complete network look like? And as we figure out, okay, that's not going to work, chop that one, that's not going to work, chop that one. We then see, are there alternatives, right? Because that's kind of like a direct line up to the housing over there. That would be great. But if that doesn't happen, that doesn't happen. Either we find an alternative route or we just pull that out.
Okay, well, everything west of the vertical line right now is not.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't
At
specifically,
least one parcel is been through plus from you, and they have indicated they have an intent to annex it, and so that becomes your problem, not the town of Milton's problem.
Yeah, we didn't stop our scope at the town of Milton. We're looking beyond the municipal
I
boundaries.
get clear understanding of what your intent is.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And these are recommendations. The town doesn't have to like adopt these per se. This is like, we're offering this as sort of a collaborative planning effort, right? So nothing here is necessarily binding you to any of these recommendations. And if they make you very uncomfortable and this is something that you want the council to approve, I mean, we're not gonna include something in here that's gonna make you guys uncomfortable, right?
We do have JD Whitehouse from Sussex County on with the, and he's here partially because we know regional connectivity is important too, right? Getting in and out of town is part of getting around town in some ways, so. Like we are coordinating with the county.
Not everybody that's involved in viewing this has the same level of knowledge of some of this that I do, and that's why I bring it up.
Oh, yeah, and we'd love to hear your feedback in detail, and especially if you wanna just actually sit down and review this at that level. Between now, the public workshop and finalizing the plan, we wanna reality check this to make sure everything we recommend here is either helpful, useful, or possible. So,
All right, well, thank you for that. Please continue.
okay, anyone else have any questions or thoughts? Yes, sir.
In looking at the way you have your roads, gridded out. One thing that strikes me is that I understand that one people will be able to have ways to get around town and not before that. Except that in reality, it gets very difficult, especially even on the major throughways through town, primarily because of parking. People parking on the street, gotta drive over to the left-hand lane to get around them. And if you've got a car coming at you, that means everybody's gotta stop. If you've got a bicycle out there, then that person may not be seen at the time when someone else is trying to concentrate on getting around that parked car and so on. The streets are just, even the main streets within town are just not wide enough.
Yeah, so we're,
You could drive a pickup through there.
for sure, so we're not just gonna say, here, it's done, right? There's actually a lot of recommendations, so. Basically, we've sort of said where there are areas where we need significant improvements, where there is we need minor improvements. And where is everything just fine the way it is, right? So even though you'll see a lot of this dark purple is kind of the significant effort, right? That's a shared use path, that's a new bike facility. That's where you need some kind of project to make that low stress cycling environment possible. The lighter pink lines shown here, are places where we'd be working within the existing roadway to do something, right? Like we're gonna come up with, by the end, for these minor improvement sections, we're gonna be proposing what that would look like. We're gonna give you some ideas of what projects would look like to actually achieve a cycling, or a walking countermeasure to make it a little bit safer and more.
I used to work in Amsterdam, in other places in the Netherlands. They build roads out. They build them both for cars and for bikes.
Yes, they do.
And we have couple lanes for cars, and right next to it is an access lane, another road just for bicycles. And most of the people in that area ride a bicycle. And if you look at the roads that are assigned to the bicycle path, they're just as engineered as the roads are for the car.
It's very inspirational. Yeah, I spent a lot of time studying their infrastructure because they figured out a lot of those really microscopic design details. So this is an Americanized framework for planning, right? We're taking some of these concepts that they do as far as like developing a grid, right? And one of the things they do is for the key cycling routes, they don't put them on the main streets. They actually separate them and say, this is the road we're gonna prioritize for automobile traffic. And they focus on capacity, flow, travel times, and safety. And then they say, right over here, 20 meters, 30 meters, 100 meters is gonna be the cycling route. And they say vehicle traffic on this route it's not that you can't drive there, but you're not gonna drive as fast on that road. So they make inherent trade-offs and say, this is the car road, and then this is the people walking, biking, and pushing strollers road. So in some regards, that's the planning philosophy that went into this one, especially this next part over here, which is Chestnut Street. So this is basically that decision we kind of talked about, whereas, federal or Mulberry and federal coming down there, you have two redundant routes that are essentially state routes. That merge into one road. And the amount of traffic on Chestnut Street is relatively low. It's about 1,500 cars a day, last count that I saw there. It's both a state road for part of it and then a town road going north. There's not a lot of traffic on there to begin with, and if you had to choose a route to go up Federal or Chestnut, you would take Chestnut. Raise hands, you would take Federal Street. Inherently, people already prioritize Chestnut Street for cycling. It just makes more sense, and there's already a connection nearby to the bridge that goes across. So essentially the idea with this chord is let's come up with a couple projects and a couple connectors that make it a seamless and more convenient route for people to bike on. So if we have an on-road bicycle facility through this part of Chestnut that connects, and then a separate connection that goes to the bridge and then goes up, and we're gonna see if there's a way to make it more straight to Federal Street extended to get to the shopping center. The idea is to reduce the amount of detour and prioritize this route for people using it, not for driving. That's the concept here. Now, what that looks like, we're still gonna work on a couple concepts to propose that, what that could look like for you guys. And if that's something the town finds interesting or compelling. These are really cool. The term bicycle boulevard was used earlier. I hate that word. I think it's too much of a platitude, right? But a route that is dedicated for cycling, and there's been some really cool examples of these where people have different towns have branded these and made them like art corridors or whatever, and made them like really interesting, sort of tourism oriented attractions in a way. And the interesting thing about this is that it kind of goes north south through town, so it's an interesting opportunity for people passing through to see the town also. Backing up though, this is also a concept that's been applied in Newark. This is something that was very, very successful in Newark. They have this thing called the Newark Bikeways, where they've done exactly this, is they basically created a grid. There's more of like a concentric grid where they've specifically said, these are low stress routes, just like this, and they've named them. So they have the Central Loop, they have the North Bikeway, they have the Southeast Bikeway, they have the East Bikeway, and they have actually set up signage, which is unique to Delaware, for this as their low stress bike network. So not only is this something that they've used to help create a wayfinding program, but they use it to advocate for projects. So they can put on a grant application. We want to make this improvement as part of our Northeast Bikeway. We want to do traffic calming on this road, right? We want to put speed tables on this road. We want to do bump outs. And here we want to do a section shared use path. Here, can you please, DelDOT, change the guardrail because it sucks and you guys have ignored it for a long time. Things like this. It's been a really, really helpful advocacy tool, wayfinding system, and framework for understanding a cycling network. So sort of the idea behind this concept was to really hone in and identify this network. It allows us to talk about it in certain ways, allows us to make decisions or priorities with the whole road network, and then its justification for chasing projects. That makes sense? You guys have any questions or thoughts or concerns? Anyone? Anyone online? You guys got any thoughts? All right, let's go on. So,
Better streets in Newark.
what's that?
Certainly have better and wider streets in Newark than you do down.
A couple. I've lived in New York for a long time. That's, you're probably right, but that's debatable, I think. So another example, which is this little, never mind. An example, right, is Lavinia Street side path. This is part of it. One of the chords going in is a project you guys have in a concept study right now, develop a shared use pathway on Lavinia Street, right? That creates a key connection right into town for all of Wagons West, and then also the coming developments further down the road. That's definitely a key part of this. Yes, Leah?
George, we have you, I see you raised hand. You want to come off mute and, share?
Yeah, I do have a question. On the map that shows the potential bike paths, it doesn't seem to be connecting to what would be the generators of bicycle use. The schools, the parks, well, perhaps the parks, but the shopping center, things of that nature. I mean, the things that generate a bike trip
Yeah, for sure.
Are the
So,
things that need to be connected by a bicycle network, and I'm not really seeing that on here.
yeah, George, so this was more of a grid concept versus like the local connections. So I'd said earlier before that there's gonna be other project ideas and recommendations that are more specific. But this was kind of the easiest way to communicate this concept. We're eventually gonna map further towards the development of this plan that's going to have those specific connections. And to some extent, the idea is that this is, a lot of like the local roads are perfectly fine to walk or bike on. They have sidewalks, they're pretty low traffic speed. Really, these are supposed to act as the connectors across town. These are like the collectors in a sense. So
Okay.
we didn't want to say every single road is part of this. It just gets overwhelming. So this is kind of a distilled version. It's more of a schematic, if that makes sense, than the final plan.
Okay, so ultimately you'll show some kind of connections from this grid pattern to what actually is generating the need for the
Oh,
trip.
yeah, like the connections to schools, like you said, yeah, for sure. Now we're not gonna get down to like now some of these we're gonna have pretty detailed concepts for, but a lot of the other projects are gonna be just kind of like a point that says, improve intersection at Milton Elementary School, right?
Mhm.
Like that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we're probably not gonna have but if you can think of a cool way to visualize it that's helpful, I'm all ears.
Okay.
This is, yeah.
I mean, there are low volume grid streets that do a pretty good job of connecting some of this network to Brittingham or to Milton Elementary and potentially to the middle school. The middle school is going to be the toughest nut to crack, frankly, because you're going to either have to put something out on 5 or come in through the back through this potential connector between Heritage Creek and Cannery Village.
We're thinking both, maybe, at least we're gonna recommend both.
So with the respect to the connections of the schools, I actually would prefer that you prioritize Chestnut Street or Milton Elementary in the way that we actually get the kids away from the school at the end of the day. Is they come across the crosswalk and you take them immediately to Chestnut Street. You get away from Federal Street as quickly as possible. So I mean, nobody, especially at that time of day, with the traffic that exists, the dismissal and arrival, you're better off staying, especially the small children, as far away from Federal Street as you can, because people move through Federal Street pretty quickly, and they become very irate at the idea of having to stop again starts to become a bridge too far for people. They can't manage their emotions. So we get them away from the street, from those kind of, and at the on Mulberry Street at HOV, you can get them back, away from Federal Street or away from Mulberry pretty quickly into the neighborhoods back there.
Yeah, and that's clearly what you need to do is the simplest route, easiest to mark, and the least exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea here is let's identify that, let's say that these are important, and then let's think about what improvements they need to be even better and further connected. So we're not trying to push a rock up the hill and say, let's spend, let's do you couldn't even, for $300 million, you couldn't even fix Federal Street, right? That's just the houses are where they are, the land use is the way it is. That's just not something we're gonna try and change with this project, right? So we're gonna try and leverage the behavior that people are already doing and make it more expedient, more convenient, and safer.
And with respect to Mariner also, it's actually very easy to access on a bicycle. You go through the cannery and there's a gate on the back of the park. There's a bunch of kids that ride their bikes over there. It's one of it. They're probably safer than most of the kids that are walking to HOV or MES, because once you get into the cannery, a lot of them come from the cannery. But I mean, you go through that back there, you don't go anywhere near the spot.
Yeah, that's kind of that purple lollipop, is like a whole connector between the areas.
Yeah, so we've been talking about destinations, and this is something that's not on this map right now, right? This is just the grid. So obviously the schools are a pretty logical origin and destination. And I think it would be very interesting to hear from y'all. It doesn't have to be right now, if you want to send us an email, like what are the other critical kind of centers that you think are worth connecting to on this? Because I think a very valuable version of this map for the public workshop will include those key destinations that are important to the community. So we can't tell you what those are. You all know better than us. So the shopping center is the library, we're here right now, schools, et cetera. So if you all give that some thought, please send those locations our way and we can kind of refine this map with layering on that information.
Thank you, George, for that point. Okay, let's keep rocking. So yeah, Lavinia Street, a project that's already has a concept developed. One of the ideas, and this is one of the more higher end engineering effort ones, right, was Mulberry Street. So obviously Mulberry Street and Union Street are high traffic. Union Street, it's very, very tight. Mulberry Street, just from first glance, it looks like where the sidewalk is on the southbound side. You could probably fit a much wider pathway that has a buffer versus just a regular 4-foot sidewalk. You could do some improvements to some of the intersections, and that could tie in on the bottom to the proposed project at Lavinia Street, come up to the school, and then get you up to the shopping center. Again, a relatively expensive project, but that's kind of what my section does. We spend a lot of time and money on this exact kind of project, taking places that are sometimes 2 or 4 lane roadways and putting these 10-foot asphalt pathways next to them, sometimes 12-foot. They can make a big difference for both safety and people's comfort on those roads, makes it safer to bike and walk. I'm doing a $12 million project like this in Dover right now. You know, the state DOT does spend money, US DOT does allocate funding for these kinds of projects. So we see it as a very big functional improvement. So that's one idea right there. That's a bit on this is probably the most intense project on one of the major roadways. But could be an improvement. Again, the sort of bicycle boulevard, you guys should, if any of you have a fun name for this, we just have north-south bikeway, which is kind of dumb. If you guys come up with a nice way to brand this could be a really fun thing to have a name for. Maybe you have some dedicated, I forget where I was, maybe they have these like, aluminum, like sheet aluminum laser cut branding things they have on top of their street blades that are really cool. I'd like have a name for it. I don't know, there's all sorts of different things you can do. But yeah, it's the bicycle boulevard concept, like we were saying. We already have a street that people are using. Let's connect it, make it safer. Let's make the intersections better. Let's make it more direct and really focus not on just trying to put in a new facility, but trying to leverage what's there. So again, similar thing for things you can do. I think these are, you know, these are like the more intense things. You want to talk about this? Leah put this slide in. I was gonna put this slide in.
Okay, so we talked about traffic calming a little bit earlier, right? And I know some of you are very familiar with what traffic calming means and what kinds of things you can do, and maybe some of you, especially those of you online, less so. So this is just kind of a little high-level diagram from an organization called NACDO, which is the National Association for City Transportation Officials, that shows some of the things. So I think the thing people think of most when you say traffic calming is a speed bump or a speed table, right? And that's in the upper left there. Now, again, we're getting into maintenance stuff, so what we can and cannot do on any road may differ, but another thing you can do is kind of what's called a chicane on the upper right there, which basically, instead of a car traveling straight shot down the street, they have to deflect. So a speed bump is a vertical deflection, you're going up and over, and that's slowing you down. Now, a chicane is you have to stop going straight and slow down to turn a little bit, right? And similar concept down here on the left with the median island. Again, it just interrupts that straight free flow. Mini traffic circles have been very effective in some neighborhoods and can be pretty low cost and things like that. So just for those of you who do not exist in the transportation space all the time, wanted to provide a couple examples, and versions of these things exist in the Delaware Traffic Calming Manual, as well as the city's stock or the traffic calming committee's work, but this is just a highly graphical way to quickly show you what kinds of things we're talking about. Thank you, Paul, for humoring me.
Thank you. Yeah. And you said you've been in the Netherlands before. You know what they do on their local streets?
One thing you know, it's very informative to see this kind of stuff. And theoretically, I'm good at that. Theoretically, it works. But the reality is, I can see the guy up in the right-hand corner who's looking at his cell phone and crashing right into that grassy knoll right in front of him.
But isn't that better, that you crash into the grassy knoll?
Well, it depends on the
Yeah.
standing. What the point I'm trying to make is that you just can't develop a diagram and that happens by itself. But you also have to take into consideration the possibilities that exist for people that are not driving in the prescribed way.
Yeah, trust me, American design guidance is very leveraged in that direction. In fact, go ahead.
That was gonna be my point, is that as Americans, we have prioritized ease of operating motor vehicle over other forms of moving people around, mass transit, pedestrian and shared pathways. It, just because it is safer or more straightforward for a motor vehicle to have a road to be absolutely stick straight so that they don't have to pay full time and attention, doesn't mean that it's right for, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the way to go to make a more universally friendly and usable and enjoyable travel way. So I think as Americans, we are sort of indoctrinated by big oil and the auto industry to want to have things easy for vehicles. And I think if we really are committed to having a different and more maybe relaxed way of life, a safer way of life, we have to change our mindset a little bit.
Yeah, so I can just tell you, our traffic calming standards aren't that aggressive. They aren't this aggressive at all. In fact, they're sometimes not even appropriate for some really low speed local roads, right? They're designed for 25 mile an hour traffic, which big swoopy turns. So I don't think you'd get something this aggressive. And we have a great philosophical conversation. I love this stuff. But back to what you're saying in the Netherlands, right? Most of their local roads are brick. Their distributor roads are hot mix, but they don't have asphalt on these types of roads. And I actually asked an engineer there one time, he was showing us some of their traffic calming, which uses these kind of thing aggressively, right? They'll push all the vehicle traffic from one side to the other in a 15 foot space. And I asked him, would you ever do that on a road with asphalt? And they said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So we don't use paving materials in that way in America, basically just by tradition. And like our maintenance regimes are different. They have a different maintenance regime there than we do. So I don't think you'd see stuff that aggressive in America. But that said, you can achieve a lot just by having a 20-foot wide roadway. Just having a tight subdivision.
I mean, the side of my house faces Harbison Road. And if there's not a police car sitting in there, which there is pretty often, it's like a speed limit. No matter what you put down for the speed limit on that road. There's a guy on a motorcycle that goes through there every day, at least 9 miles.
Yeah, if there's asphalt, people are gonna drive fast. Now, that's where these countermeasures come in, things like this, and I think the roadside environment has a lot to do with it. And there are countermeasures you can do on local streets to get speeds down. So really, that's what we're trying to say is let's identify this as we want to find out what these roadside environmental or traffic calming features are that we can get speeds down to 20 miles an hour consistently where they're not, and then focus on those.
Well, and also, I mean, with the idea of the chicanes there, it strikes me that they would work well on the alleyway streets, street alleys going between Chestnut and Federal or, Mulberry and Union, where you have a one-way street that is disregarded. And so like Church Street by MES is one way going towards the school. If you were to bring a chicane out that would narrow that to effectively one lane, you would essentially end people thinking that they can make that turn and go, towards Chestnut Street, which would, make a lot of kids very much safer, for the entirety of the school year, because you got 30, 40 kids walking down Church Street, some are on bikes, some are on scooters, there's parents, there's grandparents, there's dogs, and people are trying to make that, the illegal turn to get away from the traffic jam at the school building through Chestnut Street. So if you were to pull a chicane out there and narrow that entrance, so it's clearly just the right lane heading out, I think it would, it would prevent a lot of that kind of stuff. But if there's a bunch of those streets with a one-way designation, it's just ignored, I live on one. So probably pull that out on Federal Street without causing havoc, but you could definitely use it in other places to maybe have some pretty good benefit.
I wanted to add one thing, we did a lot of biking around town before we came up with this map, and I think the Cannery is a really good example of a neighborhood that has pretty calm, quiet streets. And if you look at the Cannery compared to some of the neighborhoods on the north side of town, the streets are more narrow, they're curved, and I think y'all have observed, people go a little slower. Now, I'm sure some of y'all who work for the town know too, that impacts other things, like larger vehicles being able to get in there, get through quickly, some other issues, but that's a good example of a development that was designed to kind of keep traffic slow. And I think we observed kids coming through that back connection from middle school and walking and biking in the road comfortably, right? Now, on the north side, you have wider streets, straighter streets. So you have to kind of not artificially, but introduce those same features that exist in the Cannery, some curvature, some things that, some more narrowness to force that behavior. Because if people are left to their own devices, any of us, you just drive as fast as feels comfortable. And to your point, you don't want to be the person standing on that thing getting hit. It's like, well, yeah, I think the car, when you put something new in, you see tire marks all over it. You put new curb in, people hit it. They hit it the first time, but ideally, over time, they adjust their travel behavior and they slow down, right?
Unless it's
There's a
negligently
golf
designed,
course
it's.
that I play at up New River. And they just changed their road to be able to cross the road with golf cart. And they put in a huge speed limit to slow cars down. There's two ruts going right through the speed limit. Speed bump, where cars are bottomed out through the speed limit. Speed bump.
There are actually, some communities that use speed humps or speed tables for traffic calming actually have channels cut for emergency vehicles, and they're in the center of the roadway.
Yeah.
So that the emergency vehicle has priority and it can drive in the center of the roadway, but it does not have to go over the speed table. So those are very
We
successful.
have a spectrum of design to really restrictive and effective traffic calming to so permissive, it's almost worthless traffic calming. So it's really where you want to be on that, and then make sure whoever's designing it is competent enough to do it and doesn't accidentally cause an issue like that. Atlantic Avenue, this was one that was identified as a street that we wanted to make better for kids and families walking, especially because the Little League is over there. And then connecting to the school, and then perhaps in the future, if there is an opportunity to get that through development, connecting to the other side of town. So really, we had in mind for this kind of exactly what we're talking about right now. As you guys know, Atlantic doesn't have sidewalks in some places. It's a little bit of a straightaway, right? Cars go very fast sometimes. So the idea would be to set up the intersections to hopefully have some traffic calming, get speeds down, make the crossings more visible. And try to make this as much of a low speed, somewhat like we're talking, it's kind of a bit of an overlapping concept with the Behringer and Chestnut Street option, where we want to have a corridor that's prioritized for people walking or biking and going about their life versus for automobile traffic. Because realistically, how fast do you really need to drive on Atlantic? Doesn't make that big of a difference if you're going 20 versus 30 when you're driving. You're on it for a couple of seconds to 2 minutes maybe. So this we see as a really great opportunity to prioritize the low speed, family friendly environment over a higher speed roadway. Downtown traffic calming, this was something that was brought up a lot in the survey, and we hear it all the time. So we're not super prescriptive at this point in time, but some sort of traffic calming through this area that's a little bit more, well, what do we say? It's a critical route, right? Like it's a primary snow removal route on Union through there, and that intersection is quite important. So there are trucks that go through there. I know that's not something that you guys like per se, but they end up there. So we can't design something that's so restrictive. We cause a problem for people driving larger vehicles, but we can squeeze that a little bit and try and make that behavior a little bit more challenging and slower. So it's not like they won't be able to get through, but it's going to be slower. Including things like bulb outs. We could even look at using different paving materials in specific locations to try to really get intersections, especially crosswalks, lower speed. So we're not really saying exactly what these things are. If you guys want to talk about this in more detail, we'd love to. I don't know how prescriptive we're gonna be with the final recommendations for this, but we identified this core area as something that could be a fantastic sort of, town center traffic calming effort. So if this whole area had a similar treatment at all the intersections through the roads there, it could change the nature of that area and really make it very clear, not just by the land use and what you're driving by, but the roadway would be different, the intersections would be different. To just create a different environment. So that's one of the recommendations as well. This lollipop looking thing, again, if you guys have better ideas like names for these, we'd love to have them. It's kind of fun to brand these things and give them names. But this is a connector between Carrier Village and Heritage. I was forgetting. Heritage, okay, that's it, sorry. I'm bad at subdivision names. Yeah, essentially this is connecting to the school and then connecting the local roads between each other through these two subdivisions. And then connections that go up to the Milton Rail Trail, up past Sand Hill Road, and then up into the Dogfish Complex to really just connect this whole area for kids walking, riding a bike, whatever it is. Basically to have an alternative way to get to Route 5, which I think you can already do this, right? If you want to walk on the grass, right? Maybe trespass a little bit. So this kind of behavior is probably already happening. Really what it is formalizing it, setting up a more dignified and usable facility for people doing that. Again, existing, not existing. So this is just a little thing, to illustrate the value of these kinds of connections, right? Like you could say like, yeah, just walk across the grass or it's fine, or like, oh, like it's not that big of a deal. These little connections between subdivisions or connecting existing roads can make a big difference in people's travel times or travel behaviors. For instance, if you live in the middle of a subdivision, you know, weren't gonna walk across the grass for some reason, or say you had a wheelchair or something like that. Basically, the alternative travel route is to go up Route 5, and then back up, which is quite a long walk or bike ride compared to if you were to just go straight through, right? It's almost 3 times longer. So providing these little shortcuts can improve not just travel times for people on these local trips, but it can really tie the neighborhoods together in an intimate way that more people would be comfortable doing. I've met a couple of people who live back here and it does sound like it's a little bit of an island in some ways. So this could be a nice way to tie it together into the rest of the town on the low stress, low volume streets. Yes.
So you're talking about putting in a connector across the school property.
Yeah, like a little trail or something.
No, it's not.
It's not school property.
There's 60-foot path across town.
16 feet.
Town,
Just
60 feet wide. Okay,
300
in that
feet.
particular drawing, it's my understanding that your agency is going to install a roundabout at the intersection of Sand Hill Chestnut, or not Sand.
Shingle
Shingle
Point.
Point Chestnut.
Yes, yes, sir.
And 5, but that doesn't reflect that in your alignments at all. In fact, I see a white line I don't recognize across there between where all the colors are and then over the 5. There's a field there. There's a field there right now. That's
Yeah,
what-
I mean, do you want us to just put a circle in there?
Oh, that,
I'm just
no,
joking.
it's already.
Yeah, no, that's a great project.
That is forthcoming at that location.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
one up by Sand Hill and 5, they're putting one in there too.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, right? The end.
No, you're talking about the T intersection,
Okay,
right?
further up,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
No.
are up there.
No, Sand Hill and Route
Sand
5.
Hill and 5.
Yeah.
Yes, they're putting one in there.
Right.
I don't think that one's on, I think it's been talked about and we've heard a lot of it from public feedback. We are probably gonna propose that as well. So there's 2 of them.
I think it's part of the traffic study.
Yeah, it
for the
is.
Granary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
That's a proposal as a result of the traffic study for the Granary, which is what we're on.
Yeah, because they're putting in like 5 of them in the area.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that's still, even that happens, that still doesn't negate or reduce the value of this connection here for these 2 subdivisions. Right?
I only bring that up because your current work doesn't reflect that, and that will create some change in your proposal at some point in time when they come into place. That's.
Yeah, probably. I mean, when they build that, they'll probably put shared use pathways around all corners of it, right? That's the American way of roundabouts.
We can only hope.
No, I think they will, well, hold them to that, right? If they say it's constrained, ask them how constrained. I think it's an important thing to have because we're proposing also with this one, a shared use pathway that continues down Harbison and then up to the rail trail. So that would actually be a really nice intersection improvement that ties into this plan very nicely.
Okay, well, I just want to point that out, that you can reflect that and know that your agency has those, at least the plans from the one.
Yeah,
At the
that one's
intersection.
moving forward. That one's gonna happen. The one up at Sand Hill, I think, even though it was in the TIS, I don't think it's programmed with any funding or like a design schedule. But,
That will be a development, for sure. Not at the end of, or at the end of San Diego.
that would be nice. Yeah, well, we'll echo that as a valuable improvement. Yes, Leah?
We have a hand up online. DJ, you should be allowed to talk now.
Hi, yeah, this is DJ. If I recall, I know what John's talking about. I believe that was the mayor who was talking about the roundabout. And I don't think it's in the CTP yet. I believe it is proposed as the part of the Milton TID. But unfortunately, with the way DelDOT projects move, it's at least probably 10 years plus away from actually having a roundabout at that intersection.
Yeah, we did the always stop. I think the always stop is in, right?
The always is in.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of the phased approach. And if we did recommend and echoed the sentiment for Sand Hill and Federal Street roundabout two, we could also look and see if an interim always stop is warranted and helpful. Yeah,
That would really help this. There's a problem with the speed transition now because you have the school zone at 20, then you have about maybe 100 yards, not even that goes back up to 35, and then it goes right after the stop sign. You go around the corner, it's 25 again. And the speed transition on Harbison Road between Mariner and Sand Hill is ridiculous, and it probably ought to just be lowered at the school to 25 and have that be the law of the land there.
yeah. I agree. And then 16, right, and Austin's here for the forthcoming 16 study. We're gonna propose some kind of bicycle, low stress cycling infrastructure on 16. As far as our project goes, and we want to take it. We think it's gonna be very valuable in town, especially as more development comes on the western side of town and the new townhomes there. On the northeast side of town, really just trying to make this safer, and I think the vision for that corridor is gonna come out of this other plan, but we also want to echo it as a valuable link in a low stress cycling network and a pedestrian network through town. And then, we have a little bit of time talking about regional connections too. So one of the regional connections we're talking about, has talked about for a long time, is the Milton Rail Trail, right? This was sort of considered by DelDOT a long time ago. We did phase 2 a couple of years ago to go to Lavinia Street. And then it's sort of been broken out into 3 other phases. Phase 3 would be another rail trail project where the actual railway is taken out and a trail is put in. Anything beyond there would be a trail next to the rail, like we're doing on the Georgetown to Lewis project, leaving Georgetown, which is a lot more expensive. Really, I think it would be great to take that all the way to Ellendale, but it'd also be nice if you guys could think of what is the most important terminus to you all. I think that would be really helpful in sort of prioritizing the recommendation for the development of this corridor this time. Excuse me? Disembodied voice. Okay. This one's fun. I love these projects. The other one we're going to talk about is the connection to the Georgetown to Lewis Trail. So this was a map that was thrown together by a study done by Sussex County Council. Oh, I don't know, 6 or so years ago. I think it was 2020 maybe. Pannoni Associates Engineering Company put this together, working with, to my knowledge, it was IG Burton, someone else on council. I think the Freemans, the Dogfish Head, and a couple other people. So they came up with these 2 potential routes to connect to the Georgetown to Lewis Trail. Now, I'm trying to figure out how much actual thought went into that, and were they talking to property owners, or what was their environmental analysis? And really, what we want to do is try and get some of those stakeholders back in a room, figure out how mature is this concept. Does it need any changes? And then perhaps recommend a preferred alignment to include in this plan, such that we can actually think about long-term funding something like this to connect with the Georgetown to Lewis Trail. So this is kind of going to be our starting point, but we're going to be doing a little bit of workshopping probably over the next couple of months through the winter to reevaluate this concept and then include something in the plan as a recommendation.
We
Yes.
have a hand up online, but. Mayor, okay,
Just looking at.
Thought I saw some emoting over there.
Yeah, it's DJ again. I think that this connection to the Lewis Georgetown Trail is more important than making a connection to Ellendale, just because the connection to the Lewis Georgetown Trail, gives you a lot more options of where people are going and their end destinations. And right now, there's just no safe way to have access to that trail without driving to one of the kind of makeshift trailheads on the west side of Route 1. So, Walker Road is already there. I think that road is a pretty good road to use. And it looks like the red portion that connects to Route 9 must be going through the Freeman communities.
That's through Cool Spring, yeah.
And if I assume there's been conversations, and I also know Josh Mastrangelo with Freeman Communities, played football with him in Delaware. So I think I can have a conversation with him just to see if, that's something real on their end. And then it looks like just basically you got to figure out how to get from, I guess, Sam
Out of Milton.
over
Yeah.
to Walker, which really isn't that long of a distance, but it actually looks like a fairly realistic thing that can be done.
Yeah, it's definitely achievable, and I agree it would be huge. There's more value here than the connection to Ellendale for sure, just from a tourist standpoint and quality of life. So yeah, I saw another hand raised. Oh, what was that?
It would also give more value to, connecting like Heritage Creek with actual pavements. Right now, you do have to use grass. So if you could have Heritage Creek connect and then Cannery Village where everybody can basically have access to that trail, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be killer. And I might be in touch with you, DJ, about that when we're getting the group of people together. I know you're pretty connected in that community, so I might reach out to you later about that.
Feel free.
We had a hand raised, I think, online. Did I see that?
yeah, George,
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo the same thing that DJ is saying, that you already have a large public investment in this network that's east of town. So connecting a town to the existing network makes a lot more sense than adding another segment that doesn't connect to anything. So to me, going east, Sam Lucas Walker, and essentially Sam Lucas Walker kind of access there gives you a lot of what you need to make that happen. And a lot of it's already there with signing. Sam Lucas, though, is signed for trucks. It's not a great truck route, but that's what Dogfish uses. So it's not a simple basically installing signs. It has to be some work done.
No, this wouldn't be a signed route. I mean, maybe there's a way we do a phase thing where we come up with a route, but long term, we would be looking for a separated shared use pathway to connect these.
Okay.
I think that would be the goal from the state perspective. Yeah, it was.
So when you talking about connectivity to the Georgetown Lewis Trail, I had a kiddo who used to like to bike to Cape. And, it wasn't a very safe way to get from Milton to Cape, but, he ended up on Cave Neck to Sweetbriar.
Yeah.
Sweetbriar now has a shared use path along about maybe a third of it. Maybe 2/3 of it now, and he connected to the Lewis Georgetown trail there at Sweetbriar. So, this concept here shows a Georgetown oriented connection. Basically it's headed southwest for connection.
That's southeast. I think you'd want to split the difference, right? If you had one that went right from Milton to Lewis.
You have an
I think
opportunity
we
with
kinda wanna balance
the Hudson Sweetbriar Cave Neck intersection improvement with the roundabout. You have an opportunity to maybe add a shared use path that would make a connection to the existing Sweetbriar paths.
Yeah,
So,
there could be two. Why not both?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Especially, Cool Spring happening here is a big deal for this whole alignment, right? So we would be probably tying into that because that would get us a direct connection first. But there's no reason we couldn't also figure out what's a viable and useful alternative that way. Yes.
Ellendale without finding Market.
We, if I could, during the coastal corridor study, we did have an Allendale representative who is no longer working for the town, who did support the recommendation. I know you were at a number of those meetings. So the coastal corridors study, which was looking at east-west travel patterns broadly, did include that trail connection between Milton and Allendale in it. It was not a high priority recommendation. It was just, you know, as most of you who work in the space know, if it's not in a planning document, if it ever does become right for grant funding, you're not getting it. So we included it as a low priority item. And that Allendale staff person did support it. It was not a passion project of theirs at the time. And again, that person has moved on, so.
Okie dokie. And then other, you know, in the Lewis Bike Plan, we did one recently, we included, and that was with the Lewis Bike Ped Advisory Group. So they had all these other non-project related recommendations, right? I'm coming from Delbot, I'm very project oriented. But if there's other things that you guys want to include in here that are meaningful to you all, especially from the town, let us know. We reached out to Christy about this previously, but if you all want to include anything, we're open to it. But again, maybe it comes down to what you want to use this plan for, right? Is it something that the council is going to approve, that the town wants to use? Just consider that. And then implementation. So there's a lot of ways to get these things done. A ton of money is spent on streets and roads and capital projects every year. Obviously, I think in DelDOT years, which isn't human years, it's like the opposite of dog years. But there is money and opportunities available to make these things happen, especially when you have goals, priorities, and a list of what you want to achieve. So one big thing, I know Milton got awarded Safe Streets for All planning funds, right? So that is something that, and just saying, if you included that low stress grid as a priority in your Safe Streets for All plan, you could use that money for implementation of that. So that is one way you could start getting Safe Streets for All funding on the ground for those projects. Obviously there's town capital funds, but those are precious gold to you guys. There's other stuff, right? It is Delaware. They'll spend a lot of money on our roads. So, and some of these do impact state roads to some extent. We also have other programs that we can spend not just on state roads. So operational programs is like traffic, say what our traffic section is doing. You know, we'll do intersection improvements, sometimes really quick stuff, but then it can lead to, like DJ was saying, a project that ends up funded by a TID or a CTP. CTP is a DelDOT Capital Transportation Program. That's the program where, you know, it takes 10 years and you can have a project that's $20 million. But you have to plan long-term for it. That's an option for some of these. DelDOT Bike Ped Pool, that's my section, that's what we do. So we manage about $10 million a year all over the states to do bicycling and walking projects, shared use pathways, on-road stuff, on non-state roads, whatever. It's competitively ranked. So we've been doing that in Newcastle and Kent County for the last 4 years while we've been building the Georgetown to Lewis Trail. Georgetown to Lewis's trail is over, so we're going to open up that competitive grant money to Sussex County starting this fiscal year. So that's an opportunity to get these projects in there. Projects are usually between $1 to $4 million. We usually shoot for $2 to $3 million projects. So you can get a lot done with that program, and it's a fast turnover. So if you have a project that's developed, you apply for it, it gets designed in the next fiscal year, 18 months to design, and then a year for construction. You can have projects on the ground within usually 4 years with that program. Transportation Alternatives Program, I'm sure you guys know what that is. That's a DelDOT program that requires a 20% match from the town. So that was what the Milton Rail Trail was funded with recently. That program is kind of booked out. They have strange artificial funding limits that projects can only be under $1 million, which in our highly inflationary world is not that much money when you're paying prevailing wage. And again, that requires 20% town match. The bike ped pool doesn't require a town match unless there's a certain extenuating circumstance.
Am I correct that if it's a safe routes to school project, that also does not require a local match?
Yeah, but Safe Routes to School is currently not doing projects, which is sad. But yeah, previously Safe Routes to School was a cutout of transportation alternatives where the state would fund the 20%. So we would do these projects oriented towards improving basically walking conditions in schools. It's a cute program. CTF, Community Transportation Funds, your legislators have access to this little slush fund every year to spend on whatever they want to spend on. That's within a publicly dedicated right of way. Very, very helpful program for getting small things done, and that can be the 20% match for those transportation alternatives projects. Very helpful. That was also how Milton Rail Trail was done. It was CTF leveraged transportation alternatives funds. Developer improvements, like DJ was saying, and the mayor was saying earlier, the developers do have to make improvements in the roadways as part of their development projects through a traffic impact study. If you guys have this plan in place when they come and you have a plan in mind for a road or an intersection, you can use that to request certain improvements in the state right of way. And I don't know what it's like in the town, but at least in Newcastle County has some pretty strong hand in what happens internally to the subdivision with certain things like this, so they can request internal improvements or connections.
Your agency will force on corrections because any new land coming into Milton is served by state roads.
Yeah, so exactly. So that would be happening. But there's also, if there's stuff in town, some of these internal connections maybe could be part of the development coordination process, where those dash lines we talked about earlier, maybe you say, if there's ever development here, we want to have a nice, high quality, low stress connection here. It's kind of like with the dash lines. And then there's these federal discretionary grants. I mentioned the $12.25 million shared use pathway project. That money came out of a helicopter, right? That is money that was authorized in the Inflation Reduction Act and the transportation bill, where they say, hey, apply for a grant, USDOT, the United States Department of Transportation. We put in a grant for a project that was a total Hail Mary. We had no way to fund the project at the scope that it was, and it was awarded 100% federal funds. So those kinds of things happen. Georgetown to Lewis was funded that way. The Newport to the Jack Markell Trail in Wilmington was funded that way. Delaware is probably spending about $40 million in these grant funding programs over the next couple of years, specifically on walking and cycling oriented projects. So those funds are available if you go for them. I highly recommend it. Pretty good at writing them. So if you need help technically doing that, I think we're in a very advantaged position in Delaware to go after those. And then there's private money. You guys have rich friends, Mayor Collier?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay, just checking. Well, if any of you on here got rich friends, especially they got a foundation, ask them for money. Sometimes you'd be surprised, that works too. Also funded projects that way. It's great. All right, Lee.
Yeah,
I've been
I can
talking
take
too
this
long.
time. You've been talking on. Everyone's tired here. Okay. We briefly mentioned Route 16. So I just said coastal corridor study. I know some of you were involved with that process. It was a big regional study, basically looking from state line all the way over to Route 1 and 16 and 9 focused. And one of the outcomes of that was the Delaware Department of Transportation needs to do a deeper dive on what Route 16 looks like, especially in Milton area. So we have a whole other planning effort for which I'm working with Austin from DelDOT that is going to be doing a deep dive on the 16 corridor. Now, a big part of that right now, again, 16, no sidewalks, no safe place to bike. But that's also going to be a little bit more traffic volume focused, right? We know it's a major east-west route. And as the town grows north, and again, we're looking long-term. So this isn't what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. This is like what's happening 30 years from now. So one thing, we will be coming back on November 8th. You're all invited, same kind of thing. And we will be dialing in on 16 and what your vision for 16 is. So you have some free time now to think about it, right? I know some of you are prioritizing very different things, but again, the long-term goal is creating a safer corridor for everyone. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, DelDOT has what's called a traffic model, a transportation demand model that's looking at growth broadly throughout the county, right? We know Milton area is one of the fastest growing parts of Sussex County, and Sussex County is definitely the fastest growing county in the state and arguably in the region. So the department is calibrating this big model that looks at all of the streets. It's kind of a macroscopic model, and is trying to project out and understand what will that growth look like in 30 years, 40 years. Is that 2-lane section enough? Does it need to be wider? Can it be wider? If it cannot be wider, where else is that east-west traffic going to go? So that is kind of the big picture issues the 16 study is going to get into. But part of the reason we're leveraging this group, and again, if there's others who should be at the table for our November 8th meeting, please invite them, is again, any project DelDOT does now, we are like required to focus on all nodes. You saw our mission at the beginning. We're not just talking about cars anymore. We're talking about walking, biking, driving. Freight is part of complete streets, so we use the phrase complete street. That's everything. So it's gonna be that big picture. We could have anything we wanted. What do we want it to look like, right? So that's what we'll be talking about on November 8th. And then we will be back in early December to present both the bike ped stuff we talked about today, and we'll actually have ideas, concepts. So today we're looking at lines on a map. That's fun, but we're gonna get into, okay, what do those lines mean? Like, what are some typical sections? What do these things look like? So you're all invited to that. We ask you to please tell your friends, tell your neighbors. It'll be a drop-in style public workshop, and we will have information about the projects you heard about today, as well as 16, similar to what we did this past spring over at the elementary school. We have not yet identified a location for that. We are working to do that probably at one of the schools. And as soon as we have that locked in, we'll be doing the formal notification process and updating the website and everything. So again, that workshop, we'll have another survey, we'll be collecting more feedback, and we'll start refining all of these big picture, high level ideas. So we actually have some real recommendations by the end of this process, which we are envisioning being by the spring or so. And that is our hard stop is the end of the fiscal year. So that's the end of June. We'd like to wrap this up by the spring, but just so you all know about what we're up to. So after our winter workshop, that's when we will hopefully have enough feedback from everyone to start writing the plan and actually having a document. And that's when, Christy, I know you're on the line, Mayor, council member, what you all do with that document is very much up to you. How, some places we work, the town council adopts it and it is a, part of the comp plan essentially. Other places leave it there as more of a guiding document that is not adopted. So that is, DelDOT does not tell you what to do with that. Paul's been kind of speaking to that the whole time. So again, your degree of comfort with our recommendations and all that, and how you adopt that document is up to you and what happens kind of after we finalize it. Does anyone have any questions about what's next? We're actually done ahead of schedule. So anyone online, any questions? Raise hands. Come up mute. All right. How are we ahead of schedule? Great work, everyone. So obviously we give you a lot to chew on. So as you all, if you have comments that come to you tonight as you're trying to fall asleep, you have our email contact. Please shoot us an email. If you have specific locations that were not on this network map that you're like, I would really like you guys to think about this, let us know, because we'll look at it and bring something to the workshop addressing that. So by all means, get in touch with us if you have anything else we should be thinking about. And if not, we'll kind of hone in on what we showed today in light of the comments we heard tonight afternoon. When is it? And we will see you all in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
And thanks to those of you online. We are going to end the recording now. That way y'all can talk freely.